Welcome to today's webinar titled Rural Transportation Connects. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few items so that you know how to participate in today's event. If you selected to join either by phone call or computer audio, and for any reason you'd like to change your selection, you can do so by accessing your audio pane in your control panel. You will have the opportunity to submit text questions to today's presenters by typing your questions into the questions pane of your control panel. You may send your questions in at any time. We will collect these and address them during the Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. I would now like to introduce John Feather, CEO of Grantmakers In Aging and moderator for today's webinar. John?
Thank you, Kat, and welcome and thank you all for joining us today. We want to thank our partner, Age Friendly Arizona, a network of communities committed to connecting older adults with people of all ages, for their tremendous assistance in today's webinar. Age Friendly Arizona is a partnership hosted by the Maricopa Association of Governments, a regional planning agency serving the greater Phoenix area. Age Friendly Arizona fosters collaboration between local governments, nonprofit agencies, academic institutions, and community groups to promote healthy aging. I want to especially thank Amy St. Peter, the Deputy Executive Director of the Maricopa Association of Governments, for her incredible leadership and her organization of today's webinar. We also want to thank the May and Stanley Smith Charitable Trust and the Harry and Jeanette Weinberg Foundation for supporting this webinar. Joining us today are national and regional leaders in aging, transportation, and philanthropy to discover practical and impactful tools to connect older people to their communities through transportation services. Blind Spot, released this past September, is a new resource by Grantmakers In Aging with the assistance of Age Friendly Arizona and supported by the May and Stanley Smith Charitable Trust. This guide features compelling data and insights from the field to support communities in launching transportation services for older adults in rural areas. You will find the full report on our website. Joining us today is Jana Lynott, the Senior Transportation and Livable Communities Policy Advisor with the AARP Public Policy Institute, Becky Miller, Executive Director at the Arizona Transit Association, Christopher Bridges, Administrator at the Central Yavapai Metropolitan Planning Organization, and Stacey Easterling, Vice President of Programs at the Virginia G. Piper Charitable Trust. We thank you all for being with us today. As was mentioned earlier, you can enter your questions for our panelists at any time in the question box on the right side of your screen. I will be collecting these and will read them to our panelists during the Q&A portion. So now it's time to get started with our presentations. So Jana, I will turn it over to you.
Great, thank you, John, and thank you, Age Friendly Arizona, for having me on this webinar. So back in 2015, thereabouts, AARP's Public Policy Institute began to hear an uptick in expressed concern from volunteers and program managers of volunteer provided transportation programs that prospective volunteers and volunteers were having increased issues with their car insurance. And 2015 is the year that Uber topped 1 billion rides worldwide. And what we were hearing is that insurance agents were having increased difficulty distinguishing between those individuals who are driving for ride-hailing companies and those who are driving as volunteers for nonprofits and for other charitable purposes. So we heard this enough that we decided that we wanted to look into this issue in more detail. And the result of that research is this paper, Volunteer Driver Insurance in the Age of Ride-Hailing, which was released just last month. Now, I think this audience is pretty familiar with the importance of volunteer-provided transportation for helping older adults remain independent in their communities and really engaged in their communities. And any issues with volunteer recruitment can really put a damper on this form of transportation. So we consider this a very important issue to look into and address. So next slide, please. And this was our research approach. We did a survey of state laws pertaining to volunteer insurance, liability, livery, and ride hailing. We also made cold calls to insurance agents at the 10 largest insurance companies by market share. And because those calls did not really elicit any definitive answers as to whether insurance would be covered for volunteers, we reached out with a formal solicitation from AARP to CEOs, the heads of the public relations offices and general counsels for clarification on how their personal auto insurance would address volunteers. And finally, we conducted several industry interviews with organizations such as the Property Casualty Insurers Association of America and many nonprofit program managers. Next slide. Probably the most impactful or potentially impactful of our findings was the responses we got back from company CEOs. And you can see from this chart, of the 11 companies we reached out to, we received answers, responses from 9 of those companies, and they all universally said that their personal auto insurance policies would cover volunteers. And in fact, volunteers would be covered even if they received reimbursement for expenses such as mileage, and they would be covered if the nonprofit were to charge a fare or a fee to the rider to help offset some of the costs of providing the service. But that's not to say that there's not still an issue, because you can go on to the next slide, please. That customers, obviously, they don't have the privilege of dealing directly with company CEOs. They deal with their insurance agents. And recruitment challenges will continue to exist as long as agents provide inaccurate or ambiguous information to their customers. So in fact, what we found from our cold calls to insurance agents is that they were really kind of all over the place, not really offering a very strong commitment to how their company policies would treat a volunteer. Many would say things like, well, we would have to charge you a commuter surcharge, or you would not be covered if you received reimbursement. And so it's very much in conflict with what the official responses that we were able to obtain through company CEOs. Next question, next slide. So coming out of this research, we came up with 3 sets of recommendations. The first is for state legislators. And of that, we are suggesting that state legislators prohibit insurance companies from denying or canceling insurance, imposing a surcharge, or increasing rates solely on the basis of serving as a volunteer driver. State statutes also need to clarify and clearly distinguish among volunteer drivers, TNCs, and other for-hire service providers. And then finally, those statutes need to clarify that even for nonprofits that charge passenger fares will be excluded from for-hire transportation and livery laws. Next slide. Now, there are 7 states in the United States that currently do prohibit the insurance companies from denying or canceling insurance, imposing a surcharge, or increasing rates. And these policies are all modeled upon a policy that was adopted in Maine back in 1995. It was developed by Catherine Freund with ITN America in coordination with the insurance industry. So it's a pretty balanced type of law. And one of our hopes at AARP is that the various stakeholders who see the need for volunteer provided transportation will get together and try to push passage of this policy in more states across the United States. Next slide. In terms of our recommendations for the insurance industry, we also need the industry to clarify their personal auto policies so that when an agent looks up whether a volunteer will be covered under the policy, that there won't be any ambiguity. And also, volunteer insurance agents and brokers, they need better education to better understand what their policies actually say. And next slide. Luckily, the Insurance Services Office, which provides underwriting forms to the insurance industry, has already developed the model language for this to happen. And it explicitly, for these ride-hailing or transportation network company policies, to make sure that volunteers and folks driving for charitable purposes are explicitly excluded from the personal auto insurance exclusion of the insurance policies, if that makes sense. The other thing that we suggested was some recommendations to nonprofits, specifically that they should purchase excess automobile liability for volunteer drivers. They need to establish routine safety protocols and also properly screen drivers and require them to complete a driver training course. And this is important because it sends the message to the insurance industry that nonprofits are doing their part to ensure that the drivers that they use are safe drivers and they're managing risk, really trying to keep any risk that exists to a very minimum. Next slide. So obviously, volunteer transportation, it's extremely important. And any challenges with recruitment can really put a damper on this type of transportation. So I don't think it was intentional by Uber and Lyft and insurance companies to increase the difficulty of volunteers in obtaining insurance or getting unclear answers from their insurance agents, but I think that was the result of this disruptive technology that came into our transportation system. But that leaves us with the need to, one, raise awareness that this issue exists. In fact, many of the interviews that we conducted with industry leaders, they were surprised from the insurance industry that this was a problem. And from that, we also need to push for state policy as well as insurance company policy modeled upon what was offered by ISO. So if you'd like to get more details on this research, you can visit our website, aarp.org/future of transportation. And I should say that we have a lot of other resources beyond just this paper that are very applicable to rural transportation as well. So with that, I want to transition to Becky Miller, who is the Executive Director of the Arizona Transit Association.
Jana, thank you for that. I'm happy to be here with all of you today. I'm going to just give you a brief overview. You may, as attendees, you may not even be aware that your state has a transit association. So every state has this statewide transit association. Most states, they'll either be formed as a 501c3 or a 501c6 in most cases. The Arizona Transit Association is a 501c6, which means that designation allows you to lobby. So we do have a lobbyist under contract. And as Jana has touched on, the driver insurance, that's a huge issue for many states, Arizona included. So in that context of that issue, you could reach out to your state transit association to perhaps help you move this type of legislation forward. That's just an example of what you could partner with your state transit association on. Our mission in Arizona is to provide leadership in the funding, advocacy, and education for public transportation services throughout Arizona. Everything from dial-a-ride to commuter rail between Phoenix and Tucson, which doesn't even exist yet. Next slide. Okay, so that's just a quick picture. You can't see us on this webinar, but that's myself and Cindy Lozano. We are a two-person organization, and we pride ourselves on building Arizona's transit community one relationship at a time. So that's important because if you as attendees, if you're trying to envision who could you put around the table for an issue, a project, a grant that you have, and you want to include the transit component, if you reach out to your transit association, especially in Arizona, we are more than happy to make those connections for you, sit at the table and just listen to try to identify who we know, what our connections are that would maybe enhance your project or your issue. Next slide. Briefly, just now, this again is just in Arizona. These are the members that make up our board. We have a 25-person board, and we have, of course, all the large transit organizations. So in Phoenix Valley Metro, in Flagstaff, Mountain Line, in Tucson, we have the PEMA Association of Governments and the Transit Association down there. We also, and I don't know that every state has this, I think we are unique in this, we have a lot of private sector on our board as well. So TransDev and Total Transit, organizations that actually contract and provide services for within our region, within our state. We are also fortunate that the DOT, Arizona DOT, is on our board. And then we have a lot of consulting firms. So Gannett Fleming, AECom, but when these folks are on the ASTA board, they're not wearing their, their consultant hat. They are all vested in, how can we assist each other in moving transit and transportation forward in our state. We're also very unique. We just added these positions on the board maybe in the last 8 years, and that would be, they're called Arizona Greater Arizona seats, and we have filled them with our COGs and our MPOs, so our metropolitan planning organizations and our central governments. And these are our rural areas, if you will, and our MPOs, our metropolitan planning organizations, are assisting not only from the highway side, the planning in their regions, but also the transit for their regions. And they're really the lifeblood, the veins of how we reach our rural areas. And I think we do a good job in Arizona. One small fact, Arizona is one of 4 states in the US that does not receive any statewide transit funding. So we have had to be very deliberate and have a unique approach to how we meet the transit needs in our state. And the partnership with, with Blind Spot, which we're talking about here today, and what the Maricopa Association of Governments and Age Friendly Arizona, what all of that has been put together. We've been a part of that, as has our MPOs. So I'm going to transition now to Chris Bridges, who is the Executive Director for the Central Yavapai MPO. And Chris is, well, he's my ASTA board president, but a very insightful man that has brought amazing change and progressive movement to his region. So take it away, Chris.
Thanks, Becky.
You're
How
welcome.
much did I pay you to say that?
Yeah, well, my raise is coming up soon, my review, that whole process. So
Yeah.
Don't let me down, man.
Yeah. Okay, you got it. Well, thank you, everybody. Happy to be here again. I'm going to talk to you, try to stay away from some of the technical stuff here and just talk about some rural transportation needs and how we're looking to address that in our central Yavapai region, which is in the Prescott Valley area. So if you go to the next slide, please. So just talk a little bit about where we're at. I just mentioned, greater Prescott, Arizona area, and it encompasses about 425 square miles as our planning boundary, but the county itself is actually the same size as the state of New Jersey. And you have a lot of long distance needs, a lot of rural areas, and majority of the services being in the Prescott area. Prescott itself is has a very high average age, almost 57 years old, and with another, third of the population being over the age of 65. We also have a very large veteran population. Prescott's the home to the Northern Arizona VA, so veterans from all over the northern half of the state are trying to get to Prescott for the services that the VA provides. What we're looking at in our area is there's a need for access to a variety of things, and we don't have a full-blown general public transit system in the Prescott area, and we are looking to invest in one in the very near future, potentially here in the first part of the year, moving forward with Town of Prescott Valley and then City of Prescott afterwards. But what we've been able to establish is that there's a need for people to be able to get to jobs. They need to get to medical appointments. They want to go shopping. And some of the benefits that come along with it are, obviously, if you're getting to your doctor, you're having increased or better physical health, but it also helps with mental health. We have a lot of isolation that not just because of COVID, but seniors in the region who are unable to drive, often they're just sitting in their home all day because they can't really go anywhere. Yavapai County has I found this out yesterday actually, a suicide rate that's double that of the average of the state of Arizona. And so all of these things can be helpful in getting you out of your home, buying things in the community, and being active. So if we go to the next slide, please. So we had completed a full transit implementation plan. We had done one 10 years ago, and a group of active nonprofits in the area kept asking, well, what can we do to further this? And I said, well, let's update this plan. Our board agreed, and we moved forward and looked at how we could put in a full transit system, and it would be a fixed route system with some demand response to get people to the fixed route, and it was going to be 6 days a week, 12 hours a day, and provide a very high level of service. And this plan was drafted with the community hand in hand. We had very large stakeholder turnout on a regular basis. We never had a meeting less than 50 people in it, and this group helped put this plan together. Unfortunately, the plan was done in February and accepted by our board in April, and was not really something that we saw that could be delivered in a post-COVID world. So if we can go next, please. So with the passage of the CARES Act through Congress and the president, we as an MPO were apportioned a good chunk of money in there, $3.592 million for public transit at a 100% cost. And our board heard that and said, well, we'd be foolish to not try to get this thing going now, especially with essentially free money. So they directed us to move forward, and we worked on a phased plan that would get us from what we have today, which is nothing, towards that implementation plan. But how can we address the needs of an area that has a lot of need for various things, but in a COVID world? So what we came up with is the opportunity to really partner with everybody. This would be a partnership with not just us, SIMPO, but also with Yavapai County, the City of Prescott, the Town of Prescott Valley, but also bringing in our local colleges. We have Yavapai College here, we have Prescott College, and we also have Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University. They're all willing to work with us. The hospital has said that they're willing to work with us, and this could be financially based or time-based or support-based or whatever that would be, but to have a system that has no fixed routes. It's all demand response, and that would be open to everybody. It's a very different approach. And if you can go to the next slide. The fancy term now is called microtransit. So what you do is you can leverage transportation vehicles in your area that already exist, or you can hire some company that does this professionally, but get them to work with other people. It could be Uber or Lyft drivers. It could be other organizations that provide nonprofit transportation, but they have vehicles, and you can stitch together a level of service so that you really only would have a 20-minute wait time. It basically takes 20 minutes to get anywhere in Prescott and Fresco Valley. So you're not having to go and sit at a bus stop and wait for an hour. Did I miss the bus? Is it coming? I don't know. This is a very straightforward, whether it's an app on a phone or you're making a phone call, they will come and get you or get close to you. If you meet ADA eligibility, they'll come right to your door. So we can go to the next, please. So this is what I'm getting into with the partnering with the local providers. We're calling it subsidizing ride hailing trips, and that's where you build these partnerships with local companies that already have to be able to supplement the service that you're providing, so that you can expand service. You can get night or weekend service in addition. Some of those uses that, maybe the college students want to go downtown Prescott on a Friday evening to go out to dinner. But you also have the folks that they just need to go pick up their prescriptions. The real advantage of this is that you're leveraging expertise that's in the region already, and you're being able to keep people employed with the jobs that they're doing, but also provide additional employment. Next, please. So the real key to this is the coordination and working with everybody. And anybody that's willing to jump on, we're willing to cooperate with. And the real cool thing is that as you run the system, you're going to respond. You're going to constantly adjust based on what those service needs are. And Prescott being originally territorial capital, there's a lot of roadways that are really narrow, and we're mountainous too. So running these smaller vehicles to be able to get to some of the more outlying parts of town is a huge advantage, but we also don't know how much demand is going to be there. So we have the ability to constantly adjust, grow service, bring on additional partners, and gives us the flexibility to figure out in this COVID world, and then hopefully once we get past it, back into regular operations. But this is a unique system in Arizona. There's really nothing like this. There's other things like this in other parts of the country. It just doesn't happen to be in Arizona. So next, please. So that's going to wrap my portion up. And I'm going to turn it over to Stacey Easterling. So go ahead and take it away, Stacey.
Thanks, Chris, so much. I appreciate it. Hope everybody can hear me okay, and wanted to say hello. I wanted to start out my presentation first talking a little bit about where I work, the Virginia Piper Charitable Trust. And Piper Trust is a 20-year-old private foundation established in honor of Virginia G. Piper, who was the widow of Paul Galvin, who was the founder of Motorola. Our footprint targets Maricopa County, so basically the Phoenix area. And our endowment is about $500 million. We work in 6 focus areas. First, children and youth. Second, education. Third, healthcare and medical research. Fourth, religious organizations. Fifth, arts and culture. And then our 6th category is older adults. So Piper Trust has been committed to older adults for over 20 years. Within our older adult area, our mission statement is as follows. Older adults in Maricopa County must have the chance to remain healthy, independent, and productive. And then under that area, we support activities and projects that work towards that mission. My role on this panel is to show how we partnered and supported this rural transportation effort in Arizona, and to encourage my funding peers on the call to think a little bit outside of our typical grant-making box and reconsider transportation as an option to pursue. I think that the difficult thing as we talk about this issue of transportation is that, rarely is that on the radar, that issue on the radar of philanthropy. Typically, you don't find many funders who want to invest in this area because we often erroneously view it as something that government only should be responsible for, not philanthropy. We had board members at Piper Trust and in foundations I worked in before who are adamant that philanthropy and government should never mix. And I'm sure many of you have heard that before also. So, but we also are learning, and we've learned through our experience with Age-Friendly Arizona, that we had a lot of misinformation going on, and we needed to learn. The other barrier that I think this issue faces is with funders is that transportation for most funders is a system. It's a big, complicated system. And often in philanthropy, you want to be able to touch things lightly, touch a project lightly, and move on. And we don't often want to go deep and stay in a space for a super long time, especially if you don't see the promise of change or the impact coming in sort of the near to intermediate future. So we're hesitant, and we're often pretty fickle, and we're funny like that. And every foundation has a different perspective, but I think in general there are some barriers like that go on. But my guess is that for most funders, the bottom line on transportation has been, it's not in our lane, we don't do that, and we probably can't make a difference anyway. So why bother getting involved? And those are tough ones for the transportation field to overcome. But I want to tell you a little bit about us and how we worked in Phoenix. We were lucky enough to have a hybrid entity in our community known as the Maricopa Association of Governments, which you heard about earlier. And in Phoenix, we call it MAG. And MAG coordinates all of our regional government. And I know some communities have this, but we're lucky enough to have MAG. And we knew that MAG, especially Amy St. Peter, its deputy director and the designer of this session, knew the ins and outs of local government and also was very astute in navigating this complex system of transportation. So for us, it was the perfect public-private partnership. Amy knew how to take small ideas, and with a small investment, she knew how to make them bigger and make them sustainable. If you know anything about funders, this is a funder's trifecta: to have a small investment, take it to scale, and then make it sustainable. So 10 years ago, Piper Trust partnered with GIA and MAG more importantly, to launch Age-Friendly Arizona. And this, as John said, it's a regional effort really focused on elevating the need for the state to think differently about the future of aging. And we provided, at Piper Trust, several relatively small grants to MAG for planning these efforts. Our investment was about $200,000 over 5 years, and it was not one that started from the beginning, we'll give you $200,000 over the 5 years. It was over time. We did a $40,000 grant here, a $40,000 grant there. And most of those efforts were, like I said, around planning, efforts around the Age-Friendly Arizona space, including around transportation. And I'm proud to say that 10 years later, Age-Friendly Arizona is still running strong, and the kicker for a funder is without Piper's support as far as financial support. We still sit at the table and we're still involved and support all of the work that goes on. But the fact that we do not have to go to our board and talk about investments speaks strongly to this effort and how it's been able to sustain itself. I think that there are several reasons why funders should consider investing in transportation in spite of the barriers. We need to remember that mobility and transportation are essential ingredients for optimal health, and the studies prove how it matters, especially for older adults, but for all of us. We know that mobility is our social connector, and it's also our physical connector, and we are finding the value of connections more and more important as we go along. We know that mobility is a solution in the prevention of social isolation, which is, as we know right now in this time of COVID, is such a debilitating thing. So imagine how we're feeling socially isolated in this time of COVID, but also thinking about older adults who, even outside of the time of COVID, have to deal with this every day. And we know that transportation and mobility are issues that can help in dealing with that issue. And finally, mobility is part of improving access to health. It's shown to be a factor required in order to close gaps and disparities in health. So it's an important one that we need to, it's a tough one, and it's an important one that we need to get our arms around. But I think it's critical that we continue to work in this space, and more importantly, to make the same case to our boards and to our funding peers so that they also can get on board with this issue. My final comments are really focused on reminding my funding colleagues of the value that philanthropy brings to public-private ventures and collaborations in this area. For the most part, I know that I'm preaching to the choir, and nothing I'm going to say and share with you is a new revelation. But to those of you who are not funders and need the case for funders that you want them to consider this, here are a couple of points that you might consider. First, seed funding. Funders can often provide the seed funding that's needed. And we know that that's important money. Those first dollars in are the important money to get in. And funders can also be that first dollar in and spark others to take notice and often to give that effort a degree of credibility. So funders have that sort of luxury to be, and sometimes the responsibility to be, that seed funding. Second, I use the word planning. While most foundations don't typically support public efforts, we can and do support planning and small pilots or demonstrations of ideas that can be tested and then taken to scale later. This allows our investments to serve as a proof of concept for other peers to see, and thereby helping others to engage in these efforts. And this brings me to the place that I think philanthropy has the most unique ability to participate, is that we offer flexible dollars. While we do put restrictions on our funds often, funders do and can keep our dollars flexible as we give to efforts like this, and we can support things that government cannot. So our dollars can be supplemental, and they can also be the place that has the least amount of restrictions. And I think that as funders, we should exercise that ability that we have as often as possible. And then there's some, of course, no-cost and low-cost abilities that philanthropy can offer. One is our convening power. We always have that unique space where we can create a space where people will come. Since we're neutral, most people will come to our table and at least hear what we have to say. And then also by sharing our connections to other resources and to our networks. And then finally, our intellectual capital. Sometimes we're coming with a different perspective. We're coming with different experiences and different knowledge that can be valuable to the table. As I said, we still stay in touch and sit at the tables, the leadership and advisory tables with MAG on the age-friendly Arizona effort. The funny thing is, like I said, we're not there as a check writer. We're there for our intellectual capital and our support in any way we can. And then last but not least, for funders, I do recommend that funders of all sizes connect with Grantmakers in Aging, who I view are the leaders in aging philanthropy. And I think GIA is great because they can increase your learning. They have a treasure trove of resources that can improve your knowledge base about these issues, like this webinar, like the resources that they have on their website. But I think the most valuable resource that I found is the ability to connect with like partners, with other funders across the country who are looking at these issues, who are thinking about it, or who have done things. We talk, I think the issue of copying, I wanted to say, what is the word when you're with your kids in school, we share ideas and we steal from each other and we duplicate them all over and sometimes make them better. And I think that's what connecting with like partners in the GIA space has been for us. It's been a place where you can build relationships over the years, and it also is a place where you can lead to fruitful collaborations. And the one that I think we're most proud of here is Age Friendly Arizona. So I'm going to stop here and allow John to take it over, and want to thank John Feather for his leadership over the years with GIA as he makes his transition at the end of the year. And I also want to thank Amy St. Peter of MAG for coordinating this session and elevating this issue. Thanks, John.
Thank you so much, Stacey, and thanks to all of our speakers. Really excellent presentations. As we mentioned, you can enter your questions in the question box that's on the control panel of your screen, and we'll get started going through those. So this is a question any of you can ask, or answer, or all of you can answer if you'd like. But do you have specific innovations or new models in providing transportation services for older adults that you could share with us?
So this is Jana. I could take a stab at that.
Go ahead.
So for decades, we've been talking about the coordination of human services transportation, and Chris in his presentation alluded to the coordination of demand responsive services. And there's actually, I would say that for me, one of the most exciting innovations that has just appeared is what's called the transactional data specification for demand responsive transportation, which sounds really wonky, but all that is it's new technology that allows the different providers of demand responsive services in a community to come together to basically share trip data in the same format so that everything can be automated. So in the past, when we talked about coordination, there might be 3 or 4 different providers in a community who may want to connect, and this really allows those providers to do that in a way that allows the capacity of one provider to be opened up to other providers in the network. So if someone from the community calls in to get a ride and their transportation provider doesn't have the vehicle or driver capacity at a given moment in time, that can be then passed to someone else in that network, and it can all be done in an automated fashion. So I'd be really interested in talking with Chris later on as to how they've done the coordination kind of from the back end. But what I can say is that this data specification, it's an open spec that is available to anyone. And it really helps to reduce the cost of this kind of coordination relative to other proprietary APIs that are, otherwise used to coordinate these types of services.
Yeah, this is
Great.
Chris.
Other speakers? Go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, this is Chris. I can kind of grow off what she just said. Yeah, that back end of it is really what's been the most creative to me, in understanding that the ability to have an effective and efficient demand response service really goes into, there's a variety of companies that provide that. It's software algorithm based, and which is why in a demand response system, you don't need to have a bus stop at all. The bus stop is wherever that computer program is going to help turn that driver to, or being able to say, hey, driver A he's pretty busy, he's too far away, but driver B, she's really close. We're going to reroute that ride to her. And just having that ability of essentially being able to say, I'm going to request an Uber ride, but it's only going to cost you $2 instead of whatever that Uber ride's going to cost. I think that's been the real interesting part of is learning how flexible those systems are and be very responsive, and it doesn't waste time with vehicles just driving around the city all day. It's going to get the people directly and taking them directly where they want to go, and then scheduling them to go get picked up again. It's fascinating. We haven't implemented it yet. I've learned so much about it, but the technology side of it is really what's made this possible.
Wonderful. Other examples that people want to share? Okay. We have a couple questions that are sort of the flip sides of each other. So I'll let, once again, anybody in our speaker panel answer these. And the questions are there unique challenges to rural areas in transportation and mobility work? And are there unique advantages to these areas? Anybody can take that one.
I think this is Stacey. I think I'd start with the challenges because that's always a fun place to start, right? And I think about as funders, the challenges are you think about most of our work and most of the space where all of us tend to exist is in the urban spaces where there is a perception of more resources and the concern that there are less resources. And I'm using these words cagey because I think it's just about how you look at the resources. I think we are accustomed to looking at the urban settings or the more populated areas as having things set up in structures that we're used to, while in the rural, I think their assets, their strengths, and their resources are structured differently and sometimes unstructured. So the challenge is that it is differently structured and differently oriented, but also the potential is that we can uncover the strengths. We can work to those strengths and perhaps knit responses together that satisfy the setting that we're talking about. How we do that, I mean, as far as the what's is still to come. But I think what needs to happen is when we look at urban versus rural, it's really about changing the lens of and looking at the value system that we are accustomed to and really adjusting it.
Thanks, Stacey. Anybody else want to take a crack at that one? Okay. So this one is a question partly, I think, for Stacey, but I think Becky could weigh in on this one as well. And that is the question is around the role of philanthropy is the specific question. But one of and you gave a wonderful set of examples, Stacey, in your presentation about this. But I think one of the things that I don't think I heard was that philanthropy can often provide matching funds for what are much, much larger federal resources that get left on the table because nobody can provide the match that's provided. So I wonder if either one of you want to talk about that issue just a little bit.
Yeah, John, I would just echo, thank you for adding that space, because it is a place where funders can sort of do another one and done sort of space. It is in the matching. Sometimes we have the resources and it's a pretty defined space, and it's not a risk. So I think that's what's attractive about matching funds sometimes, is that we have this entity that's going to guarantee if we match the dollars, and that is attractive to funders often. So it can be that one place where we can say, again, we sort of seed it or we match dollars to make an effort move forward. So it is another vehicle. Usually it's a sizable amount, sometimes it's not, and I think it's a great place for funders to fare in. But the other thing I think is valuable is that it also, again, sparks our other peers to possibly join in. So we can rally the other troops to possibly join us or collaborate in leveraging those dollars and adding the matching funds. And I know, were you saying Becky or Jana?
Well, anybody actually, but specifically Becky or Chris because of their local interactions.
Sorry.
John, this is Becky, and if I had Amy St. Peter's Excel spreadsheet in front of me on the grant that she was able to procure through the Harry and Jeanette Weinberg Foundation, I could speak much better to it. But here's how that piece came together. The amount of actual cash that came from Harry and Jeanette Weinberg Foundation was, I don't want to say small, but a small portion. And then Amy had to come up with, we could match that foundation money with in-kind and of course our own resources around the state. And in the case of, there were many transit organizations that were involved in this, and they had in-kind resources from volunteer drivers, et cetera, that we were able to bring to the table to match and get the actual cash portion. And then in the case of the Arizona Transit Association, we had never funded a project like this, but we even in our small amount brought cash to the table, and that was a first for us. That was but yet super exciting because it was an opportunity. When this all started, it was like May 2018, and there was a Beyond, I don't know, John, if you will remember this, Beyond Here and There, Transforming Mobility in Rural America Through New Technology, a summit, a workshop at UC Berkeley in California.
Right.
And Amy I don't even know how I got invited. Anyway, I was there, and I didn't even know who Grantmakers in Aging were. Never even, the whole philanthropic, piece to this for transit and transportation had never crossed my desk. And when I sat there that day, my head just spun. I'm like, oh my God, we're the perfect state. We're the perfect. And then Amy, like many of the panelists have indicated, Amy St. Peter had the vision. She brought all of us together, and then we brought our resources, from our tables, and it came together beautifully, but in a very unique philanthropic way, a fabric that Amy St. Peter worked, endlessly, but it came together beautifully. So I guess my words would be bold, you guys, just be bold, put it out there. If you don't put it out there and have the conversation and bring these partners to the table, it's not going to happen if you don't have, at least the vision to start with. And we're fortunate in Arizona that MAG does take a very huge role in the exceptional things that happen in our state.
I can only echo those things in all those regards, including how complex the Weinberg Foundation grant proposal was. I was involved with that to some degree. Chris, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think Becky nailed it right there. And I would say, in addition, I think it was Stacey said, contributing to the matching funds, that's really important. But what I've seen, in our area, it's been the government side has been reluctant to make that investment just because it's a much more conservative area. And a role that the philanthropy can provide is on the advocation side and advocating for investments in this and being able to show what those investments mean. I think Amy put something in the chat box. Somebody was asking for me about timeline and success, but I'll just stick on success and say, you know, I mentioned the suicide rate and access to doctors, and whether it's physical or mental or prescriptions. Those are things that I constantly hear in this area, that agencies that work with folks that need these services that can't get there, transportation is the barrier. The lack of transportation is a huge barrier. So getting out and engaging the role of government and educating them on the importance of what the benefits of this would be. Measuring success, I would love to not have a suicide rate that's as high as it is. I would love to see that my neighbors on my street aren't having to pay $20+ to get to the store, and then $20 to get back. You know, anyways, I think the advocacy side of it is very important as well.
And I would just like to add the flexibility that the Federal Transit Administration has for matching funds. We've talked a bit about how philanthropy can match. There's also the opportunity for the private sector to match as well, and FTA does allow for a lot of flexibility. So for instance, with the rural inner city bus program, they allow, if you connect your local transit service to a long haul Greyhound route, then the investment, a portion of the investment that Greyhound is making in that long haul route can be used to contribute toward the local match for inner city bus service. So that's something, I don't know how widespread knowledge that is, but things like that, there's always a way, I think, to work with Federal Transit Administration to come up with those matches. So don't let any money stay on the table. Scoop it up.
Exactly. And at this point, we're going to have to move away from our questions, but I do want to return to our panelists now, one by one, for their final comments and words of wisdom. So Jana, we'll start with you.
Okay. Well, there is tremendous innovation happening in the transportation sector today, and sometimes that results in disruption that can be problematic, like when ride hailing results in insurance problems for volunteer drivers. But also this disruption can be very beneficial. So there's a lot of conversation in transportation circles about creating what are called mobility as a service systems, where you really can plan your trip and access a vehicle as well as pay for the trip, all kind of in a single platform or application. And if we're really able to realize that, then those individuals who depend on public transportation, who are not able to own a vehicle or drive themselves, they really could benefit from an overall improvement to our transportation system. The key here is really designing for everyone's needs at the outset.
Thank you so much. Becky?
Yes, thank you, John. Amy St. Peter did get me the information, so I'm going to use my 30 seconds here to say that we received $300,000 grant from the Weinberg Foundation, and we were able to match that with our partners, 1.7 additional $1 million. So that's a huge number. I mean, how do you get to 2 million off of 300,000? But we did, and Amy was huge in that. So I want to extend to all of our attendees and whoever hears this recorded webinar in the future, if you are interested in what we did in the state of Arizona, I know I speak for Amy St. Peter and myself, the Arizona Transit Association. We would dearly love to present this to anybody in your state that is interested in how we made this happen, because it is a unique program. I don't know, John, if you've seen this anywhere else, but if we could do this across the nation, it would be amazing, and we're very proud of it. Thanks, John.
Yeah, and it should be. It is a unique program. Chris?
I just would like to, extend, if anybody has more questions about what it is we're trying to do, feel free to reach out to me. I think our contact info is there, or you can just go straight to our website, which has the planning documents on there and my contact information, because it's something that we've been working on for years. It's highly technical and trying to stay away from that. But I guess just a real quick answer the question about the timeline for it. We're looking at hopefully having an RFP out and a response to that for service providers, potentially have a contract by the end of this coming summer. So it's going to move pretty quick, and there's a lot of parts to navigate through, but we're real excited about it, and can't wait to get this thing going.
That's wonderful. And Stacey, last word to you.
Last word would be to my funding colleagues, take a second look at transportation. Consider it again. It's not a government issue only. It's an issue that all of us need to explore and to resolve. So I encourage you to consider this important topic.
Thank you so much. I want to thank Jana Lynott, Becky Miller, Chris Bridges, and Stacey Easterling for their wonderful expertise and many, many years of hard work to bring all this program to fruition and all the great things they're going to be doing in the future. I also want to thank our partner, Age Friendly Arizona, and the May and Stanley Smith Charitable Trust and the Harry and Jeanette Weinberg Foundation for supporting this program and today's webinar. And I do want to add a personal thanks once again to Amy St. Peter for her fantastic work and the work that MAG does as the organization that holds these pieces together. We will be making today's presentation available to anyone who wishes to view it later, both the slides and the audio. Please watch for our email to be sent within a few days. And we hope you'll join us for our upcoming webinars. You can learn more about these and register at our website, www.giaaging.org, giaaging.org. And finally, I want to thank all of you for participating in today's webinar. Please stay safe.